Hello and welcome to What is Health? And before I press record, we were just joking about the little shiny patches on our heads.
If it's glazing you and glaring in you, I'm really sorry about that.
And I'm joined today by Paul Johnson.
Yeah.
And we're going to talk about health. And we've done that annoying thing already, where 5 minutes before we said some really profound things. And I hope we haven't used up all our profound words already. But yeah, I suppose we were talking about the purpose of this and the idea that health has a different meaning to different people. And I suppose I should backtrack and sort of think about where you've always been in the periphery of my life. I've been aware of you as this person. We worked in the same health trust.
Yeah.
And when I was thinking about someone to speak to, I knew that you had a sort of particular career trajectory, and we'd spoken before, and there's some interesting takes on health that you had. But maybe we'll backtrack. So tell us a little bit about Paul. Tell us about Paul's early life, and then we'll get into your work, perhaps. Is that all right?
Yeah. How long have you got?
We've actually got 2 hours. Can you talk for 2 hours?
I can talk for 2 hours. That's the problem. I can. So, who am I? So I'm the youngest of 7 siblings, and I think that's quite significant, really, because actually going into group psychotherapy, I think you find your medium according to where you came from. That's what I really do believe.
Okay.
I think the younger me, really wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I had quite a social experience. That doesn't sound right, but I had more of a social experience at school. I don't think I was necessarily stupid, but actually it was more about how do you get on with people, how do you relate to people, how do you understand people.
Yeah.
And I really liked it. So I liked school, I had a really great schooling. I was in Essex. And my family are from Jamaica. And it's a really interesting one. They came over from Jamaica and they decided to go to Essex. A lot of families went to Brixton and went to South London, and they decided not to. So I'm never really sure why that was, but I think it was quite significant in terms of the journey that I took, interestingly enough.
Okay.
After school became a barrister's clerk, and was really interested. As a barrister's clerk, all you do is take big heavy books from one side of the road to the courts on the other side. And I was working for the law courts in London, but just heard some really interesting cases, just heard things which were about people, and about personalities, and about trauma, what happens after an incident or an episode, and suddenly got really curious then about, so I wonder what that's about. And my sister's a general nurse, and it was my sister who said, well, why don't you become a nurse? I was going to go into psychology, and she said, you don't want to do that, become a nurse. And that was it. So my start was in mental health nursing.
Was there a point when she said, get into nursing, did you have any resistance to that idea? Or was it that you went, oh, hold on a minute, I've got a sense that I've been doing this job, I've noticed I'm quite good at something, therefore I think I'm suited to this role?
So I knew I wasn't happy being a barrister's clerk.
Okay.
So I knew there's something about you other than go into law.
Yeah.
And I just didn't. I don't think I'm that academic enough to sit down and go through law. I can do detail, but it taxes me. If that makes sense.
Oh, it makes complete sense. Yeah.
So when I was talking to her, and I spoke to mum and dad and said, this is what I'm really interested in. It was my sister who started her nurse training and just said, that sounds like you could do the mental health branch of what I'm doing. And that was the start of it. So that was a real curiosity, which was just about people. So it was more about people.
Okay.
And then was really lucky, finished my training, trained in Essex, finished my training, went to work for a therapeutic community in Wimbledon.
Oh, I need to hear about this.
And that was just that, that formed who you see today, because that was about, I worked with a Jamaican consultant, Agri Burke, who was the first Jamaican consultant, I think, that I'd absolutely worked with. That I've worked with since. I've worked with other Jamaicans who are doctors, but this was the first consultant psychiatrist who used to talk about culture. He used to talk about culture, who used to talk about people's background, he used to talk about, food, that sense of what feeds your culture.
Do you think people were listening when he talked about culture at that time? Do you think that's something that people would sort of listen to and see the value of understanding culture in the context of nursing? Or do you think it was something that was possibly not quite heard as it should be?
He was seen as left and way out there, so it wasn't considered. People who worked on the unit really got it, and so I'm still in touch with those people. They're my closest friends, and we really got what he was talking about, really understanding who you are, understanding where some of our thoughts come from, that they're not necessarily ours, but they're shaped by those that are around us.
Do you know what? I used to think that. I used to teach like sociology. So I'd be teaching sociology and I'd be like, I understand the theory of this, but I wasn't really feeling it, even though I was teaching it. And then the lockdown happened and it became easy after that because you'd lived it and like everyone had felt the effect of society, culture and yourself and that sort of in that sort of fake sort of experiment that we had.
Absolutely. And Edgar used to say, it was a great thing that always stayed with me, we talked about families and we talked about upbringings and stuff like that, and he used to say, are you a rice family or are you a potato family? Mm. But actually, thinking about what that meant for us, or a pasta family, actually was quite significant because Caribbeans eat loads of rice. There's something about how food's cooked and that sense of how you take stuff in. So I know, I cook loads of rice at home. My kids, we have rice and peas. That sense of real cooking at home feels quite important for us. So I think that there's something for me about culture, about really understanding about how do we do this? How do we do it? It doesn't have to be spoken about. How do we do it? So my kids, I can hear when they cook, they phone and say, Dad, I've done this. Look at this chicken. Look, I've done this jerk, whatever. And it's quite nice just to see that cultural revolution continuing to go through down the road.
Is it about sort of, what is it about food? Because this is alien to me. I went through my whole primary school, my whole high school without eating a meal during the day. I was like, it wasn't a thing. It was alien to me that was a point of contact. And so is it that it's presumably not just about the food, it's about something sort of deeper, that connectedness?
So I think for me, I think cooking for people that you love, I think is really important because actually the attention that goes into that's amazing. Mm-hmm. I think when we bought our house and we left London, little galley kitchen where we lived, and the thing that sold our house was the kitchen. Yeah. So the kitchen is a place where we play some music and we cook food and there's a table. People come in and they sit and you're walking around, it's like car conversations. So they come in and they sit and you move around and people are saying, I've had this is my day or whatever. Yeah. And then we sit and we eat. Yeah. And we eat together. Yeah. And I remember a lot of my friends at school were saying, I don't want to eat with my family. We all had to eat together. We all had to. Yeah. It's a regular thing. We had to eat together. My dad was there, my mum was there. We had to wait for dad to get home. So that feels quite traditional, but actually that's where we heard about stuff. That's when we just spoke to each other. That's when we
I think that is really interesting. I think one of my deepest, most ingrained memories is cooking with my mum. So I probably talked this down a little bit, but when it came to the eating part of it, it was quite interesting. It was slightly distant. I need to think about that.
It's well worth it.
Yeah. So we were talking as well. We've had a recent conversation because you've recently changed your role or your direction, and perhaps before we get to that, can you tell me a little bit more about you worked in this therapeutic community, and then what sort of happened after that? Because you've ended up in Norfolk. I said ended up.
Yeah. I chose to come here. I wanted to be here. Yeah. So I'd done my basic training and I went to go work in the therapeutic community. There were 4 teams, and it's quite important. The 4 teams were a personality stroke adjustment disorder team, which is the team that I was attached to, and it was more child and adolescents. But they were I want to say 15 to early 20s were the group that we took. There were 2 eating disorder teams, anorexia, bulimia, and there was an acute catchment area. So I worked in one team, but actually we were responsible for the whole lot. And I used to live in Essex, but travel across to Wimbledon. So that was like a good hour and a half. And I think you do stuff after a while and you change your car and it makes it slightly easier. Yeah. And I thought, I just don't want to do that anymore. So actually I then thought I want to do something a bit more local. Really. All my family were local. My wife was local. So at that stage it was about, well, what do I want to do? So went to work for a community alcohol service in Hackney. Wasn't too enamoured with that. And I think that for me was about the world can be really, really different. So went to work with child and adolescent psychiatry again. Right. I liked the Hackney stuff. I learnt a lot, but actually I just didn't see a career there.
Hold on, I'm not letting you get away with this. Hold on. So the drugs and alcohol, you said something really interesting. You said you had the experience that it could be very different. What was it that that didn't fit or didn't feel quite right? Was it you? Was it?
So if I go back to the therapeutic community, everything is data. Everything is data. What people do, whether they eat too much, they drink too much, they do weed or they take drugs, everything is data about actually how do people manage what it is that they're feeling. How do they tolerate that stuff and regulate their emotions? So I kind of like went along to Hackney thinking we're going to talk about people. And we're still going to have a conversation about what's fueling this, what's behind this, how are you going with this? And instead, it was around symptom relief. So how do we stop you from doing that? How do we get symptom relief? And once you're there, you're gone. So I want to have a conversation, but the service was saying, we don't want to have a conversation. Actually, what we're trying to do is to stop people from having fits and seizures, and we want to just move them back out again, knowing that they'll come back.
Ah, it's a brilliant description, isn't it? I've often heard that description sort of like phrased in terms of they're concentrating on sort of the physical or the biological, but what you're saying is that the kind of symptomatic relief rather than that underpinning drivers for the reason that people are sort of acting in that way or coping in that way. Okay, and then, sorry, you went from there to, that's where I cut you off.
Back into child and family services. So back working with children and young people in Hackney. Again, huge learning. And again, went to Hackney, I thought this is going to be really great. But young black kids would come up and say to me, we might look the same, but you're not the same because you're qualified, you're trained, you're on that side of the room. I'm coming to you with issues and problems. And again, what they talked about is culture. Because they started to say, you don't sound like me, you clearly don't live in one of the estates that are around here.
Right, okay.
How are you going to work with me on some of this stuff? And that's great, because actually that's it's not about, you can't colour match people. So tell me what it is that I'm missing. Let's have a conversation about that. So again, I really liked that, just that sense of being able to kind of slow down, work with people, work with social workers, work with different services to understand what might be happening for this child. Lots of refugees at that stage, again, just real different groups.
Did you find it easy to have that when these young black people that you were working with sort of said that? Did you find there was part of you that found that conversation difficult? Or did you find that easy, that kind of conversation about difference?
I guess at that stage, I'm thinking, well, you're absolutely right, because what you're picking up is I'm Essex boy. Yeah. And that's the reality. I probably am very different to you, and you probably, like when I saw that first Jamaican consultant psychiatrist, I probably am something that you think, oh, I haven't seen this before. I haven't seen, certainly in the realm of psychotherapy. Right. Again, I think I was we had 3 sites, St Leonard's, Woodbury Down, and ours in central Hackney, and I was the only black male from a Caribbean background. So again, it was just seen as being quite unusual, if that makes sense. So I think people were really curious, the children, where have you come from? What have you had to do to be able to get there?
I think the reason I ask it is there's another part of this story where you interviewed me for my nursing lecture role. Thank you. And I remember you asked a question around culture, possibly, I can't quite remember the wording of it, and I remember having that tension of I don't feel like I've got competence to speak about culture, because I very much viewed it, or I'd been sort of nurtured into this viewpoint that culture was something that applied to, didn't apply to me because of the colour of my skin, which is weird. I just find that it sort of blows my mind a little bit when I think about it, that I'd allowed myself to sort of think, I don't have culture, and to sort of partition myself, like you're saying, it's like this individual culture. Of course I have it, I clearly have it. Okay, that's really interesting. So tell me a little bit more about how you sort of progressed from there through your career.
So really simply, young families on the way, looking around London thinking, where do I need to move to? Where would I like to move to? And I actually just thought, I don't think I want to live in London. London wasn't my experience growing up. I want to move out. And so ended up in Norfolk. Looked around, ended up in Norfolk. Brilliant. I only came here for 2 years, and I've been here for 22.
That's what we all say.
That's what we all say. It's been that real sense of, how did that happen?
Wow. Okay.
So I really liked it. But one of the things, you come to Norfolk and you realise the health trust that we were in, that was it. So again, my Hackney sense, if I didn't like Hackney, I could go to Haringey, I could go back to Wimbledon, I could go to Camden, I could really move around. If you're in this area and you're not happy, and it's not saying that I wasn't happy, but actually, how do you grow? How do you really extend yourself? Because there was, at that stage, there was one general manager for CAMS, and I thought, even if you retired, you've got 5 or 6 people who will go for your role. So what can I do that might stretch me, keep me interested, make me less bored, and to just move around, and to kind of like use my skills where appropriate.
We were talking a bit, we were sort of joking, as we were walking from the car park to here, we were having an interesting discussion about how perhaps we've changed at various points in our life. So I'm thinking if you moved to Norfolk around 22, I'm trying to guess your children's ages, I think they're slightly older. When did you have children? Was that as you moved to Norfolk, or was it slightly before?
So it's an interesting journey, and there's something else I forgot which I think is quite significant. So I moved to Hackney, had my eldest child, and then my daughter came after that, and it was when my third son had come along, but in between that I'd done my psychotherapy training, and I can't help but think a bit of psychotherapy does us the world of good, because actually I think for me there's a real change then around the who am I now, and who would I like to be, and also about the I've now got children. That means something, that's different, and what do I want for them? So there's that whole thing that starts to happen during the time when I'm doing therapy and I'm exploring myself, I'm exploring my culture, my family, my background, and coming out of that, that's when I suddenly thought, well, maybe you should do then, slow down, you've got these kids, slow down and just enjoy having them and a family, and enjoy, just being part of someone else's life.
Have you felt that parenthood, you've changed? So the conversation we were having was, if you don't mind me sharing, was that we both realised we were both the youngest child, and I think I joked like, that's why I'm selfish or something like that. And I definitely feel that having a child made me less Jason-centric, and I can feel it as we move through parenting. Do you feel that it sort of changed you as you've moved through the stages of being a parent?
Yeah, it shifts your relationships, but it shifts your relationships across the piece. So my relationship with my parents changed quite significantly, because actually now, again, like I say, the youngest, I could actually see just how tough it was. They were Jamaican nationals. They came over. They had to navigate the system. They had these children who were navigating the system, but from a slightly different level. And they had to look after. So I'm looking at them now, thinking, "Oh my gosh,
that's incredible." What
you did was absolutely amazing. I don't know if I could do it. I moved to Norfolk, but I still had everyone here in the country. I couldn't have left everything behind to come here with nothing. So there's a real sea change around those sorts of relationships. So you've got a changing relationship with your parents and your family, but at the same time you're looking at your children and you're thinking, I kind of want you to have some of the stuff that I didn't have, but I also want you to have some of the better things as well, some of the more, so have more access to me, because there's so many of you in a larger family, you've got to kind of share mum and dad, whereas just kind of like getting them to, just have a bit more access.
Why did that feel important then? So it was about the size of your family, but what perhaps drove you, what was the meaning behind that in terms of, I want to give my children better access? It wasn't just purely a time thing.
So I'm the youngest, and my eldest is 11 years older.
Right, okay.
So for me, there's just something about, just trying to slow things down, and just trying to see things through children's eyes, if that makes sense. And I guess maybe working with children and seeing and hearing about some of the issues that children raise, and just wanted to be around a bit more. I wasn't a perfect person, because they'll be watching this at some stage. I'm just going to say it for the record. I was never a perfect person.
To clarify for the record, neither of us were perfect people. Okay.
Ever.
So we can edit that.
We can edit that. So I wasn't going to be a perfect parent, do you know what I mean? And I kind of made mistakes, and I kind of sat there and thought, no, we're going to do it this way. And so the older I got, the more I suddenly thought, actually, I can feel confident in not having to know all the answers. I can feel a bit confident in kind of like just holding the ambiguity. And when they say it's really rubbish, I don't have to say to you X, Y, or Z. I can just tolerate it.
That was quite a turning point for me as well. I had a similar sort of moment. I catch me on the wrong day, and I'll probably have a bad reaction to it. But the moment I was like, oh, hold on a minute. I don't have to be the expert, especially in the various roles I had. It was quite liberating. It was liberating in terms of how I viewed life and my sort of career. So I'm going to move us along a bit, because there is a part of your career that I'm really excited to talk about. I had a little encounter with you. So your wife was my first clinical manager, and
tells me all the time. She does.
Honestly, she probably the starting point for me sitting here. You talked about not being a natural academic, but she supported me in my first postgraduate thing. She signed the papers and said, "Yep, go and do that." So eternally grateful. But yeah, so I suppose winding the clock forwards a little bit. The first time I met you was in one. I'll get this wrong, but it was in a leadership role. I was a primary care dementia practitioner, and you were supporting us in there. And I just remember sort of seeing you and going, "Oh, there's a guy. He's a lot of charisma and those sorts of things." And it was very fleeting. And then you were just someone notable in the trust that I would know. Can you talk about that sort of period of your career?
So really helpful. And the psychotherapy training, the group analytic psychotherapy training was fascinating because it wasn't just about myself and my network, but you apply those principles to organisations.
Right, okay.
You start to think about what fuels organisations. And I always think of organisations a bit like a plane. So again, you think about, there are people that are in the seats.
Okay.
There are your cabin crew, and there are people who are taking you to the destination of where you need to go. Yeah. So going in and starting to think about, I think I'd done a restructure. I'd done a restructure and I'd had to move one set of wards from one area to another area and to split the community team. And I thought I'd done quite well with it. And at the very end of it, they said, "And you've now done yourself out of a job because we don't need you there."
Right.
And I thought, well, that was really interesting. And I remember speaking to the head of HR at that stage and saying, "You guys have got no idea about the impact that you have on the workforce." Now, I'm okay, because I said, I know I'm going to get a job. I feel kind of happy with that. Yeah. But at no stage did anyone work with me to say, what do you need? Because you're holding your team through this really difficult, challenging period. Who's holding you? So no one said that. And I remember saying it to the HR, and he said to me, "You're absolutely right. We've got no idea what you do. So we do things in the background for the workforce, but we don't really understand and appreciate just what's there, what's happening. We've got a role in HR. Do you fancy coming on in?" And that was it. So I literally stepped in, and I kind of sat there and thought, I'll give it a go, because that's what I'm like. I'll give it a go. Why not? So I went in and then started thinking about how we work with leaders, how we kind of really equip leaders, how we do some of that stuff around values. And this was before we started even speaking properly about values, but it was a real great segue into, actually, how do you develop staff?
Yeah.
How do you do, and that's nursing, how do you work, how do you lead change through others so that they deliver great patient care? So I wasn't necessarily doing it directly at that stage, but I knew that the children and families, and when people needed care, it could be my family that needed care. How were they going to access that unless we had really great, competent staff who culturally got it?
Did that role change you? I always think of work as a kind of, or I have done, as work as separate from Jason outside of work, but the more I think about it, the more I think everything I do in work changes me outside of work. Did it change you?
Did it change me? I don't know if it, I have to think about that. Did it change me? I'm going to say I think it did, because actually what it made me realise was, organisationally, I always think the pilots must know how a plane works, exact direction that they're going, and they've got to have it, they've got to be far cleverer than I am in order to be able to do that job. What I worked out about organisations is that's not necessarily the case. And actually where you think organisations are going and you think people have got it isn't always the case. So for me there was something about that then really shifts things quite fundamentally for me, because actually how do you really support people where actually you might need to manage upwards as well as work alongside? How do you, if you've got someone's ear in a really senior post, don't waste that. How do you have conversations to say, even though you think you're doing this and it makes sense, that's what your staff's telling you. So going back and using that to really influence. So I kind of think that that's the bit that probably did shift in me, that sense of influence is much more important than role or seniority. It's about how you influence people. Because it felt like at that stage I didn't consider myself to be in a leadership role, but I clearly was, because I had the ear to someone who could influence further. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Was that because you had a little bit of imposter syndrome, or just purely the sort of position of you sort of physically in the trust? Or
I have huge imposter syndrome, but I as a supervisor, I say everyone has imposter syndrome.
I worry about the people that don't.
Yes, absolutely. So I think we say when we're running our supervision training, you'll say, put your hand up if you've never had imposter syndrome, and no one puts their hand up, so we can kind of park it and move on.
Yeah.
But I think
Good. Next. Yeah.
next. But there's that real sense of, yeah, what am I doing here? And being the youngest, I don't know if you found this, being the youngest, you find yourself in places where you think, I have no idea how I got here, and if I just keep really quiet, no one will even notice that I'm here.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I did. Just sat there and just thought, and initially just thought, soak it in, take it in, just soak it up, take it in. And but again, just suddenly thought, actually, well, no, don't do that. Actually, you find your voice. And so actually, what I was able to do, the psychotherapy, and I think moving into these sorts of roles, I just found my voice and thought, well, I'm just going to say it. And either you listen to it or you don't. But at least that way, I think I've said it.
I think it's kind of fascinating though. If everyone's got imposter syndrome, that's a kind of interesting phenomenon. It's possibly a product of work, isn't it? Work is constantly moving, whether it should or not, and so I always feel like I'm sort of one step ahead of where I should be. But maybe that's part of workers' learning and development. I don't know. Yeah, but anyway, it's definitely a thing.
And it doesn't shift. I guess that's the bit. I would look at these senior leaders, chief execs, directors of nursing, and I would sit there and think, oh my gosh, you don't know, or you're not curious enough to find out. We need to, things would happen. Right, we need to do something about that. And I was saying, but maybe there isn't anything you can do about it. Maybe you just need to hold it and say, look, this is a real wicked problem. We're going to try and work it out. But when you try and fix it, you'll come in and you'll change it again. But they're wicked problems because someone else would have sorted it out already if it was that easy. It's more than money and it's more than workforce. It's a complexity. But you've got to slow down your thinking, and that's not a luxury that I think there is in the NHS to slow down.
That's very true. So I don't want to jump it forwards too much, but I need to get to this part of the career. There was a moment towards the end of when you were working in this role, and you've transitioned into the role that you've got now. Is that sort of? Yeah,
I've been really lucky.
I'm being clumsy, but you know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to get onto what you're doing now.
And I'm really lucky. Career-wise, I'm really lucky. So, stayed in HR. I worked on doing some organisational development stuff. Went back into clinical care as a psychotherapist, and just thought that was amazing because it was just something about how the world had shifted dramatically. I'd only been gone for about 4 years. I was still in the trust. I'd only been gone about 4 years, and I always did supervision. But getting back into the work made me think, crikey, it's really significantly shifted.
Right.
And while I was thinking about what to do, was asked to then, move into the role of education, which is where I met you again for that second time.
Yeah.
And coming towards the end of that, I remember thinking with that sort of a role, whatever I do next, it now needs to be out of this system. Because I kind of sat there and thought, I feel a bit like the furniture. And I feel a bit like everyone, I get wheeled out, because I've got a great smile and you can do this, and it's really positive. But actually it felt like I couldn't, there was nowhere else to go. So anyway, I saw a job, and it was around kindness, and it was around, a kind life, and it was around working with kindness, and doing that whole stuff around leadership development, doing stuff about culture, working directly with, with staff, to really think about. We know that the work is really tricky, and we know that work is really, really pressurised, and we can't solve the system because that's government, that's ICBs, that's whatever it is, whatever the regulator is. But there are some things in our gift, actually, which is about how we can relate to each other. Because I've worked in some really tricky roles. The therapeutic community, at some level, was actually quite tricky. But we were so good and kind and nourishing to each other that actually means that you can tolerate the work.
And when you speak about kindness, is it just broadly sort of everywhere, or are you talking about the sort of microsystem, sort of like the kindness between you and me as co-workers?
Yeah, and I think I'm talking about behaviours.
Okay.
I'm talking about really stopping to think about what's it like on the other side of me.
Yeah.
When I'm having a good day, and people are seeing that, what do they see?
Yeah.
And when I'm in survival mode, and the pressure's on, what's it like for me then? Because all of that, that's what people are experiencing. And that's the same at home, it's the same at work, it's the same no matter where you are, that real sense of being under pressure. So I kind of guess that's where my head started to go. And we went through COVID. COVID in some respects, there's two tales of COVID. Great, I got to spend a year with my children that I probably wouldn't have had as adults, and I really enjoyed that. And I thought, you're actually quite decent human beings. So I gave my wife and I had a pat on the back, a glass of champagne, said this is really great. And in the same breath, when we started coming out of COVID, the system started to take over again and wanted to really own it. So why haven't you done this? The KPIs aren't being met and you need to do... And I sat there and just thought, yeah, no, I don't know if that's where I want to be actually. Because actually people have really felt this pressure and they will do for a number of years. And unless we stop and say, are you okay? Are you okay? You know, really simple stuff. They're going to really struggle, you know, to kind of like move on. They're going to, because they'll just focus on the KPIs and the measures. And it's a simple question. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Flip roles.
Hello.
When was the last time someone said to you at work, how are you?
So we joked about this yesterday. It wasn't actually it was, we joked about this yesterday. The kind of how are you and then the how are you, that kind of doing it twice because you have that standardised answer. It was actually this morning. I was reflecting as you were talking about kindness in the workplace, and I can say this because it's positive, but one of the things I really love about the place that I work is it's very distinct in that interpersonal kindness. I felt it, like you said, some days Jason's in survival tired mode, definitely comes out sideways, but most of the time the thing that really draws me to working here that I missed in lockdown because I was sort of on my own is that reciprocal sort of, I've got a bit of time for you.
Yeah. But that's the key bit. The key bit is a lot of people don't just say, how are you?
Yeah, and it is unusual. I would say through no personal fault, perhaps. It's like you say, perhaps it is a product of these sort of it's almost like this sort of numerical sort of like tasks. I haven't really thought of that. Yeah, this sort of fog of not quite having that time to just do that.
Yeah, just to stop.
Really
because usually we say, how are you? Because we're about to ask you a question. or I've walked into them, how are you? You're right? But I haven't listened to the answer. I'm a distracted sort of listener. So to really slow down and to just say, how are you? I think it's a simple thing, but nothing we do. We don't do it regularly, or a bit of appreciation. You know, we wait until people leave a job and then we give them these cards that are massive with loads of take care, or you've been great, loads of little stories and anecdotes. But we know that people, you know, will make a difference. They'll do their best because they want to make a difference, but we don't often tell them what that difference is. Some real simple things, I think, and I think that's what kindness. I don't think it's just because I think it's got a bit of a twee thing about being kind.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit. I was sort of pricking my ears up a little bit when you were talking about the managers, you know, sort of having to do something. And it's that I always think of that sort of like, it's sometimes harder to not do something, to accept something, all that stuff where you're still is really profound.
Yeah.
But the stuff where I do stuff, actively do stuff, sometimes makes me feel like I'm more of a, you know, I've got more of a utility, more, you know, I'm actively trying, and it's more perhaps about people's perception of me and what I'm doing, whereas the acceptance thing, that's tough because Jason's just, he's not doing anything.
Yeah.
But actually that kind of stillness is really important, I think.
I think so, and that's the reflective practice, that's the supervision, it's being able to, I think, join someone in something and then work out what it is that you're going to do, because you can act on it. You know, I think that's the kindness bit. You can be tough and be kind. You can act on things, but actually sometimes you might want to say, I need to really understand what it is and what would make a difference.
Okay.
What's going to make a difference here? Because actually if I come in and, I don't know, move you from the ward or move that person from the ward, it might seem like it's solving it, but it's actually not going to solve it. What is happening? What's going on here? So I think for me, that's the slowing down bit, and actually trying to work out what the right questions are, rather than I can hear that you're in distress, so let's just try and stop it. It's
really interesting, because I suppose we think of work as a kind of place that you go, and often we're sort of like, oh, you know, you can be a bit sort of dark about it, but I don't always think about it as a place that I can be still and healthy. You know, I perceive it as I've done the bit that's sort of like really intense, and I'm going home to do my healthy things. I'm going for a run, I'm going to eat well, I'm going to have sleep, probably, you know, and I think it's really important. I do see work as a vehicle for health and to feel like I can do the things that you're talking about.
And as a leader, I think, as a leader and as a manager, I think what I need to do sometimes is to role model that, so that when someone sees a patient, they're being equally as curious about what might be going on. So it's not just about symptom relief, but actually what is happening, who's in your network, how are they relating to what's going on. So for me, that's a curiosity bit, and that's the same with staff. I think it's the same. What happens with, and maybe that's the therapeutic community stuff, there was something about who was mirroring who. As a staff group, were we doing something and our service users were mirroring that, or vice versa. So for me, there's something about actually how we model care to our staff. I think we pay it forward. We pay that stuff forward, and they go out and they can be a bit more curious. When you're distracted, if you've had an argument with someone, someone's told you for parking the car in the wrong place at work and move that car, and you're really frustrated, and you know what it's like, because I've had it, you leave that, you've moved your car, you're really annoyed with how they've talked to you, then you go and pick up a patient from the waiting room. And that will affect how you hear what's going on for them. It will affect all that stuff because you're listening, but you're distracted because you're really conscious of what's just happened. Or that team meeting, or that frustration. So that's the bit for me. Being able to kind of slow down, I think, just means that you can hopefully turn up with a bit of a blank canvas, I think.
So in terms of your health, your sort of personal health, sort of, I don't want to say sort of outside of work, because I think that what I'm hearing is how intertwined it is. But what sort of do you find helps you with your health, or what are you aware of in terms of your health? So was the kindness, is that something that you just, it fits for me when I'm sort of a casual observer? Is that sort of almost, a theme that runs into your personal life as well?
So there's no utopia. I think it's always work in progress. And I have to say, the other thing around moving, I've got 5 years before I can retire.
Right, okay.
And that's a real game changer, because suddenly your head starts to say, what am I going to do? Am I going to just really stop? I don't think I'm going to stop. What am I going to do? So I feel like I'm transitioning. It's a great book by William Bridges called Transition. So it's about what am I moving into? And actually, I might need to take some time before I actually get there. But actually, also at the same time, I'll be hitting 60, in that point. What am I going to do? What's my health going to be like? I've pretty much ignored it for most of it. I do a bit of running, I do this, that, and the other. But actually, now's the time, I probably do need to really change it and think about my stress, think about what it is that I eat. I put on, like most people, my clothes shrunk over COVID, which might have been my weight gain. And suddenly it was that sense of, my blood pressure went up, all that sort of stuff. And I suddenly thought, you can't just keep on doing this. You can't just keep on and ignoring it and saying, I must get to it, So what is it that I've got to do? So suddenly there was a bit of a, okay, what are you going to do? When you have to have one of those conversations with yourself, what am I going to do?
Daily.
One of those kind conversations to say, when I know what I'm like, when I start to do it slightly differently, then I get really hooked into it. I love it. So I do meditation, I do mindfulness, and I just use the mindfulness app. But I kind of do it every day. I kind of stop and do it every day. So just have a couple of minutes out, use it before I do these sorts of things, or I go into an interview and I just pause a bit and breathe and remind myself that I'm here and I can be really present.
I think what people often, they always think, don't they, of the things that we do positively, like mindfulness is a really good example. We always think we have to have the bamboo mat out, sitting under like an oak tree, all of that. But those little pauses, that's part of that sort of mindfulness practice, isn't it? That kind of just as we were setting up, I was having that little technology anxiety. I could just feel that little bit of adrenaline there, and there's a bit of a skill in kind of sort of noticing that and just going, it's all right, what's the worst that can happen? But you can really perceive these threats, and I think throughout my working life, once I get really into something, that's where I'm not really having that time to just go, dude, just take a breath and chill out.
And that's the key. I don't mind feeling anxious. I can get up and I do. I speak to auditoriums, I speak at conferences, I do loads of online stuff, and I don't get anxious about that. When my IT goes wrong, and I'll tell you a story about that, my IT goes wrong, I sometimes just giggle and say, oh my gosh, what have I done here? I invited two separate training groups onto the same Zoom call. With I think there's something like 360 people. I had 60, there was another 300 going elsewhere. And they were just all looking at me, and I was like, oh.
I've done a thing.
So I've done a thing, and I just giggled, and I just
Did
said,
you? Okay.
"You're just going to have to bear with me for a while I
Okay.
get this sorted out."
Was that sort of like a natural coping mechanism that you've always had? That sort of ability to, because I would have a meltdown. I can picture that situation. I'd blag it, and you probably wouldn't tell, but internally there would be a lot of stuff going on there. But it didn't necessarily push your buttons.
I think I'm sensitive to shame. I think we're all kind of sensitive to shame, but at that stage, it's like, oh, I know what I need to do to kind of get out of this. And almost, I sat there and just thought that everyone watching it will be smiling, thinking, rather him in that situation than me.
That's a good one, yeah.
And so I could use it. I just took it in that vein.
Yeah.
And everyone kind of liked it. Everyone's like,
Yeah, I'm enjoying it.
yeah,
It's a story.
I'm enjoying it, and I was just kind of like, whoops, didn't expect that. So it was great. It was really easy. So that's my approach. Sometimes when things go wrong, it's that I've been delivering training and been kicked off out of teams, and you just sit there and think, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Go back in and say, IT's not having a good day today. Do you know what I mean? It's that sort of stuff.
I know exactly what you mean, because it happened halfway through my interview. It was during the end of lockdown, and I got kicked out of the interview for the lecturer job, and you were sat there, and the screen just froze. And I was like, yeah, I've never wanted a job more than I wanted this job. And I was like, well, anyway, yeah. And just going back slightly, again, I was just interested in, you said you have absolutely no issues talking to sort of an auditorium of sort of 300 people. Is that a skill you've developed, or is that just part of it? I have a similar thing, and I've never quite understood why. I probably never really thought about it. But do you know where that sort of comes from? Was that always a thing, or?
I think it's a psychotherapy thing. I think it's finding your voice, but it's also a positioning thing. That when you're standing up, people see you as the expert, and I stand up and I see myself as a facilitator.
Okay.
Because I'm not the expert.
Yeah,
Actually, the expertise is in the room.
Yeah,
and what I need to do is to make sure that I translate what I've got here to your understanding, so you can then take it out. So and to be that facilitator.
That's a good description.
Someone called it once. It's like being a conductor. I don't play the instruments, but I'm getting you to kind of like work in a certain way, whereby you're making the music and you're understanding it in a slightly different way.
Yeah, there's no better buzz, I find, than having something sort of behind me that seemingly is complex, and then within 15 minutes you've told everyone exactly how easy it is to understand, but you've done that sort of in the way that perhaps you've phrased it or something.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's kind of been my approach. But that's what but also to be really curious about people as well. Sometimes I look and I think, how did you get there? How did you get there? Why are you doing that? Or what do you think? What's behind it? What drives you? That people's ambitions. So again, that's my sense of people. And how they end up being in the positions that they're in. I don't think you just fall into it. I think there's something about what makes you think that stuff, and where does it take you.
I remember a distinct point. I was doing a sports and leisure recreation HND, something like that, in the 90s. It was my first encounter in academia. I was rubbish. And I just remember I gave 2 talks. The first talk, I had a meltdown. I had to walk out, and I was like, I can't, like this kind of like, just can't do it. And the second talk, I just remember I had a little word with myself in terms of just be like yourself, or just be Jason. And then I spoke as though I was Jason. It was really weird. Yeah. So there wasn't any scripts, there wasn't any, and I was speaking about something that I sort of knew a little bit about. And I just remember something clicked in my brain and went, oh, you can do it, it's quite easy. You just sort of like need to sort of stop seeing. It was probably a bit like that expert. Don't focus on the knowledge, just focus on the emotion.
Yeah.
That was kind of an interesting bit of learning, I think. And ever since then, I've been like,
all right.
Yeah.
The other key to this, I'm also quite happy to give something of myself. So if order, to be Paul, I can talk about stuff. I'm happy to talk about my background. I'm happy to talk about, this is what it is. This is my thought processes, because they're nothing surprising. I think a lot of people go through that, and that's the bit. Sometimes people aren't sure, or they don't want to, and that's okay. I can understand why people don't want to open up about that. But actually, I feel quite happy to do that, if that makes sense. Just have those conversations. Because it's how we learn.
I feel the same. I sort of like having that sort of. You're right. I think you have to be pragmatic sometimes. I can't be full on Jason, but giving those sort of having a little bit of vulnerability with that stuff. I think is quite disarming, and it sort of, you know, and it disarms me as well. It's sort of like, oh, okay, like I'm this version of myself, and it's a bit more real and authentic. Yeah,
and that's the health key. Vulnerability, I think, is the real key, because there's something about working in health and being able to be really vulnerable. You know, when you're hearing stuff, and I used to hear some stuff and think, cool, crikey, I've got kids. Do you know what I mean? And what would that mean for my kids? Or I would hear stuff and say, cool, you're talking about that, but I know that my kids have talked about that as well. So do you know what I mean? But also that vulnerability, just even in terms of leadership, I don't have all the answers. You know, I'm not supposed to. I can go and find out, but there's a real vulnerability in the work that we do when we're working with others, because I think it's about being quite relational.
Interesting. Right. It's been fascinating. I've been asking people to think of, and this is probably unfair actually, I've been asking people to think of 3 words that describe their health. And I think in my mind I thought, oh, this will be easy, because like then you'll have to sort of the name and then the 3 words and stuff. But I asked the first gentleman, and he took a long time to sort of come up with his 3 words that sort of described his health. But do you have any of those? Don't worry if you don't.
So, and you said this yesterday, and I thought, I'm going to get 3 words, 3 powerful words, and it completely left my brain. But my 3 words, I think curiosity.
Okay. Yeah.
I think for me, and I'll explain it very quickly, but there's something about my health now is different to when I was 18. Yeah. And actually, I'm now eating more of a Mediterranean diet. I'm now doing different things. I'm eating foods that actually even 18 months I wasn't eating. Because actually I'm saying, I need to eat slightly differently, and I need to work out what my body needs rather than what I'm used to just consuming. So I'm eating and I'm nourishing and I'm tasting. So curiosity. I think alongside that, I think, and it's not a word, it's a phrase, it's a journey, not a destination, because there are some times when my health is really good, and that's either my emotional health or it's my physical health. And you know, like I said, I lost my dad last year, and I'm allowing myself to kind of sit with that and take that journey in terms of what that means and what that means for me and those that are around me. So it's an interesting one.
We talked about that actually, the journey of parenting as well, and that kind of like that, how I changed along that journey. So
So this journey, and I think, what's the other thing? So my 3rd one, and that's where I got stuck. What's my 3rd one? My 3rd one would be, I think fortunate. I think I've got really good genes. I think I've been really lucky. I haven't been ill. I haven't been ill, not at all. You know, I've got high blood pressure. I think most people my sort of age start to get a bit of high blood pressure along the way. But actually, I haven't been ill. I don't really go to the GP. I've never been an inpatient in hospital. So I kind of sit there and think, actually, something was working in that respect. So that's my bit about so look after it. Don't rely on it. You have to look after it. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future. But up until now, kind of fortunate. I've been all right.
Okay, I kind of pounced that one on you, but I found I'm really clunky when it comes to starting. I've just gone to pressing the button and starting, and then I've got to the end, and rather than go, oh, that's the end. I thought that's a nice neat. So maybe if you have 24 hours before I publish this, then you can think of those other 3. But I love those.
I really like them.
Yeah. So thanks ever so much.
That's all right.
It's been you've always been in my sort of working life. I've known about you, but I've not known about you to this level, and you've made me think about health in a different way, so thank you.
Can I say one last thing?
You can talk for another hour, we're only at 47 minutes.
Right. So my final thing is, and this is where and it goes back to the career, the final thing is, how do you start giving back? Because one of the key things, and I've been really lucky, I've had several fantastic people who've supported me, who've coached me, who've just opened up doors for me. And so I'm now at a stage where I think, how are you going to do that to others? So it's a real key thing, and that goes back to the kindness. What can I do for others in a way that really helps leave a legacy that I'll never know about, but to leave something?
Is that part of, was this a fairly recent sort of realisation, and with this kind of 65 years to go retirement thing, or is it just something that's been on your mind for a while?
I think I've always done it. Interestingly enough, I sponsored children through Plan International, and I've done that since before my eldest was born. I just decided, it's a bottle of wine a month, I'm sure I can do it, and I've never stopped, but got really curious in sponsoring different children in different areas, and I've been doing some work in Sri Lanka talking about mental health, and going out there and talking to them about actually what does mental health mean in that community. So again, That's my bit. So my bit at the moment, that's where my journey is taking me. How can I start to give something back? There you go. And on that, I'll leave it.
Love it. Thank you for coming along and sharing your thoughts on health.
Thanks for having me.
Okay,
Thank
brilliant.
you. Thank you.
Cheers.